Worrying news for her. Now, she does remain in that #1 spot nationally among Democrats. That's the same Washington Post poll. But her lead's slipping, particularly among women voters. In July, 71% of left-leaning female voters said they'd vote for Hillary Clinton. Wasn't seen as a surprise then. Look today, that proportion has dropped to 42%. Now, securing the female vote has been one of the linchpins of Hillary Clinton's campaign strategy. Over the last few days, she's headlining Women for Hillary events in New Hampshire and Wisconsin, and she had one today in Iowa. But then in those same polls we mentioned, CBS News web surveys, you see her losing to Bernie Sanders in both Iowa and New Hampshire. Now, sure, it is early, and polls are just one way of determining a candidate's status in the race. But the energy in this race, according to many on the ground, also seems to be moving towards Bernie Sanders. Tonight, this is just a short time ago, he spoke to a huge crowd in Manassas, Virginia.
Manassas, thank you. What a great turnout. 4.5 months ago, we began this campaign, and some of the media was saying, well, you know, they got this senator from a small state. He is a fringe candidate, because nobody in America really thinks that the American people are prepared to take on the billionaire class. Well, it turns out that in Virginia, in the West Coast, in the Midwest, in New England, it turns out people are prepared to take on the billionaire class.
Bernie Sanders there in Virginia tonight, sounding confident. Now, the Bernie Sanders for President campaign is also making aggressive moves in terms of hiring new staff. They're actively looking to hire campaign coordinators for when? Well, for Super Tuesday states. That's on March 1st. Candidates, they say, must have a good sense of humor and a strong commitment to the ideals of the Bernie 2016 campaign. So Bernie Sanders right now actively bulking up his campaign infrastructure for a long delegate hunt out to Super Tuesday, and he's going to places around the country that Democratic candidates for president often wouldn't go, especially this early. Before that event tonight in Manassas, he spoke to a crowd today of 12,000 people at Liberty University in Virginia. If you follow politics, you'll remember that name. That is the university, of course, founded by the famed televangelist Jerry Falwell. And Bernie went there today to deliver his message.
I believe in women's rights and the right of a woman to control her own body. I believe in gay rights and gay marriage.
Now, the applause you could hear on that tape, that came mostly from a very small group of Bernie Sanders supporters that trekked out to Liberty, and they were there in the front of that very large auditorium. Sanders, in his remarks today, knew he was reaching out to a predominantly unreceptive audience, but nonetheless, he tried to bridge the gap, positioning his well-known economic populism within a religious tradition.
I say this as somebody whose voice is hoarse because I have given dozens of speeches in the last few months. It is easy to go out and talk to people who agree with you. I was in Greensboro, North Carolina just last night. All right. We had 9,000 people out. Mostly they agreed with me. And tonight we're going to be in Manassas and have thousands out, and they agree with me. That's not hard to do. But it is harder, but not less important, for us to try and communicate with those who do not agree with us on every issue.
That is what Bernie Sanders looked like on offense today. Now, many Clinton backers are worried that she seems something more like stuck in neutral campaign aides, calling Iowa backers, reassuring them that they have a long-term strategy. That's according to a BuzzFeed News report. But Clinton herself is striking more assertive notes on the trail. She even debuted her own SNL-style impression of Donald Trump on the trail today.
I have to admit, Donald Trump is entertaining, I have to tell you. I really do. I really do find it entertaining. And, you know, I kind of wish I had that same sort of mentality, like, Oh, listen, I don't need to tell you anything. When I get there, peace will be breaking out everywhere. Prosperity will be raining down upon you. We will have the new age. Well, I would like to do that. But I don't think that's how a great democracy makes its decisions about who's going to lead us.
Joining us now is Dionne, columnist for The Washington Post and MSNBC contributor. Good evening to you. And what effect are we seeing here in the Trump and Bernie surges on the rest of the field, particularly Hillary?
Well, good to be with you, Ari. I mean, tonight you saw a really interesting contrast. There are a lot of people who say, well, Trump and Bernie are both kind of the same. They're both outside of protest candidates. Well, here you had Donald Trump, who spent like the first half hour of his speech talking about himself, talking about his contract, and Arnold Schwarzenegger taking his old job and all that stuff. And then you had Bernie Sanders go to Liberty University. He quotes the prophet Amos. He quotes the Gospel of Matthew, talking about wanting to treat others the way they treat you. And it was a totally different thing. So they may both be drawing angry people mad about the status quo, but they're very different candidates. And I thought what Bernie did today was really a great thing. I think the proposition he laid out there that people should talk to those they disagree with was very good, and good for those Liberty University kids, probably most of whom are staunch Republicans, for giving him a polite and sometimes enthusiastic response. And the last thing about what Bernie did is, this is a message, Bernie's Jewish, this is a message that a lot of progressive Christians have been giving for a long time, which is, look, there are disagreements on abortion, there are disagreements on gay rights, but really there ought to be a lot more consensus on issues of social justice and economic justice and inequality. I'm not sure he converted any of the Republicans there, but I suspect he got them thinking about issues that they didn't necessarily think about all the time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things that Donald Trump said today in a somewhat of a critique of the press was he said, he has to keep revising his speech because he's always carried live on national television, which none of the other candidates he claims that ever happens to. Bernie Sanders has a pretty regular economic stump speech. What he did today, though, was seeded, as we showed, with some of that scripture and some of that moral argument. Do you think that worked for him with this crowd, or was he really using this opportunity in civil discourse, as you say, to try to speak to persuadables beyond Liberty University?
Well, first of all, Bernie Sanders knows that he doesn't run simultaneously on two cable networks the way Donald Trump does. So this is a genuinely interesting thing to do that clearly got some news coverage. But I thought he did do some interesting riffs here. The one that grabbed me the most was when he talked about family values, noted that he has 7 grandkids, that he believes in family values. But then he said, basically, if you believe in family values, shouldn't you be for family leave, which every major rich country in the world has, except us? And that's a kind of argument that I think more people need to make to religious audiences, because I think, as a gut issue, I think most people think that new parents ought to spend time with their kids. That's not a liberal issue, and I think Bernie made it sound not like a liberal issue, but like a consensus and a compassion issue and a family issue.
And what does it say to you, though, when you think about whatever the so-called conservative religious vote is? What does it say that Donald Trump seems to be doing just fine among those voters at this point?
Well, Donald Trump is getting a share of almost every Republican constituency, including religious people. He's not doing exceptionally well. He's not doing exceptionally badly. But I think when you look at Ben Carson and why he has climbed in the polls, I think he's kind of the alternative for Trump among conservatives looking for an outsider, because he is a genuinely and deeply religious man. Where Trump is flamboyant and full of himself, that Ben Carson is quiet and thoughtful looking, even though he sometimes says some crazy things about President Obama and Obamacare. It's a real contrast. So I think as this campaign goes down the road, you're going to see Trump doing not as well with religious conservatives and Carson doing better. And I think that's that competition. And Trump knows it's there, which is why probably he started taking shots at Ben Carson.
He certainly has. We're going to actually be covering that more later tonight in the ramp up to Wednesday. And Carson and Trump, of course, exchanging more words. Dionne from MSNBC as well as The Washington Post. Thanks for your time.
It's so good to be with you. Thanks.
Great. Appreciate it. And a programming note, Bernie Sanders will be Rachel's guest right here on Thursday night. That's a conversation you don't want to miss between the two of them. We have lots more ahead, including the exclusive interview with the woman who helped 2 convicted murderers escape from prison and the craziest political moment of the day, which has nothing to do, I promise, has nothing to do with Donald Trump. We have a big show tonight, so please stay with us.